Been a busy couple of days in Miami Dolphins land between assistant coaches talking, Zach Sealer press conference, practice today on Tuesday. Getting into some of it here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today on the show, primarily focused on defensive assistants and their press availability yesterday after the Dolphins published those press availabilities on Monday afternoon. Had a chance to comb through both sides of the ball. Didn't want to try to squeeze offensive and defensive assistants into the same spot. So with what was a closed practice today, no reported injuries coming out of the other end of that practice, which is great. Seems like the Dolphins feel like they're in a pretty good place as far as Austin Jackson, who I know when we left it off before the end of last week, he got stepped on, and it sounds like we're going to be good to go and locked and loaded for Austin Jackson based off Mike McDaniel's comments over the weekend. So deep breath from an injury perspective. And it's the unfortunate reality of, I think the Dolphins have had a physical camp thus far. And on one hand, you want to be healthy for the start of the season. But on the other hand, if we're going to ask this team to live and breathe and embody a more physical approach, the byproduct that comes with that is there's going to be more wear and tear and more violent collisions and more guys that get dinged up and banged up. And that includes Alec Ingold, who had a scary incident over the weekend. Sounds like he's going to be okay. But that's part of the deal. And if we're going to be like bighorn sheep and clashing horns to get ready for the start of the season, I'm willing to take the collateral that unfortunately is going to come in the way of some of the Dolphins players having some wear and tear and bumps and bruises and banged up so that they're ready to play physical football when you start playing for keeps in about a month. But it's enough of that. No major injuries on the other side of today's practice here on Tuesday. They practice again tomorrow, and then they go to Chicago for a couple of joint practices. Should be a healthy, competitive opportunity that awaits the Dolphins. We're going to get into some of the things that Anthony Weaver talked about. Joe Barry talked about his champagne problems, and that's not literal. That's a figure of speech. Austin Clark talking about the depth of the defensive line unit. We got lots to get into. So let's go ahead and, without further ado, start with my guy Travis Wingfield, former host here on Locked On Dolphins, now with the team, obviously. And he asked Anthony Weaver about the diverse package that the safety room has to offer from a skill set perspective. And we've talked about what I think is a really deep safety room as far as some intriguing options for guys that can do certain things. But it was something that Coach Weaver dropped mid-response that got the fist pump out of me. And you flag me and tell me if you know where it's coming as I'm reading it. But he was asked about the coverage matrix of Minkah Fitzpatrick and Ife Melifonwu as a former college corner and what that can do for the diversity of the safety room. Coach Weaver, you had Minkah, Ashton Davis, Ife, Elijah Campbell played nickel here in the past, and we have yet to see what the Dante Trader kid can bring too. A couple coaches yesterday, by the way, shouted out Dante Trader. So my eyes on, it seems like they like him. We'll see what that looks like when he comes back. But continuing Coach Weaver here, those guys in the safety position that have that multiple skill set and can do a bunch of jobs, that's going to create some angst in the offense. They're not going to know who is in, who is doing what, particularly when you have three of them on the field at the same time. My brain starts immediately spinning, but all the angst and hesitation you can cause in an offense because you don't know what the defense is going to do. Big nickel. We're talking three safety packages. Anthony Weaver's teasing it already. been asking for it, right? Because the big nickel packagings that have 3 safeties, what that allows you to do from a personnel standpoint, your coverage is a little bit more sturdy than having either 4 down linemen and 3 linebackers, or 3 down linemen and 4 linebackers, 2 of which are rush players. Whether you're 3-4, 4-3, your base personnel, big nickel is where you can kind of match 12 personnel a little bit if you have the right coverage players as the slot options to buoy playing in the slot. And that's a high stress position, right? So you got to have the right kind of safeties to do that. And obviously the Dolphins brought in Mike Hilton and what he can do as a nickel player. But big nickel's kind of been romanticized here on this program because of the diversity of what it can do from a coverage versus run support standpoint. And we got Anthony Weaver teasing it here on August 4th, Monday, August 4th, yesterday during the press availability. That really fired me up. I'm not going to lie. Because I do think, amidst all the questions around the corners, Minkah Fitzpatrick, Ife Melifonwu, and whoever, whether it's Ashton Davis, who's the post player, or you start in 2 high shells, or maybe somebody starts down in the nickel and you spin out and the safety that's high rolls down, and then you can kind of roll the entire coverage shell. You saw the Dolphins do a lot of that last year. And to be able to have guys who can simultaneously do that, but then if they need to fit the D gap and fit the run, they're able to do so in a way that's not going to make concessions for getting offensive linemen potentially on a cornerback trying to fit in the B gap if they motion away and you have to bump the second level. And it just gives you more answers and options. So to hear Anthony Weaver talk about that and talk about his brain spinning in that regard, that's where that 23 Ravens defense, they had Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen as their off-ball linebackers, as their second level players, and that was a pretty special combination. But it was the safety grouping that included Marcus Williams. I believe Geno Stone was the other safety there, and then obviously Kyle Williams. It was the 3 safety stuff that was really special for what they could do. And I'm not going to say the Dolphins have that kind of makeup of their safety room, because I don't think that would be fair to say. But that got my blood pumping a little bit. And that follows up quite well with, I believe it was Travis that also kind of asked him about the investments at defensive tackle, at safety, and at off-ball linebacker. Kind of the core and spine of this defense has gotten this big infusion. Travis asked through 10 days of camp how those returns have looked thus far. Anthony Weaver said, I think great defenses are built up the middle. You got to be strong out the middle, and that's going to force the ball to the edges. And we have great edges, both at the defensive end spot and those backers fitting the alley or safeties. Feel really strong about that. And I think that is something that stands out to me with Phillips, who I think will ultimately end up playing predominantly as a nose, and Kenneth Grant, who could play all over the place, and Zach Sealer. And we're going to get to Austin Clark, and he talked about the depth of that room yesterday. And then we're going to get to the second level next and talk about Joe Barry and his champagne problems for their options on who to play and how to play him and when to play him, and because they got a lot of players that can fill certain roles. I think the coverage matrix for me, as I sit here and I try and piecemeal this together, actually, I'm going to get into it after the break. How's that for a nice tease? After the break, I want to give you my working theory on the corner situation versus the coverage shells and how I can see that playing out based on what they did last year, what the personnel looks like right now, and maybe trying to anticipate some of what the next evolution of that and that next step of that evolution is going to look like. So that's next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Today's episode of Locked on Dolphins is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It is the best time of the year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football season is back in full swing. This year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. Me and Locked on Dolphins are playing on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your 1 millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they just dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team each week gets eliminated until there's one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and try this new mode. If you're more into the classics, you could still play head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/lockedonnfl. Joe Barry. I didn't realize this. I don't know if he intended to make a Taylor Swift reference or not. I guess Taylor Swift has a Champagne Problems is the name of a song, not a Swiftie in any capacity. But Joe Barry asked about how to get Willie Gay on the field with the way he's been performing. And Barry Jackson asked this question. So I wanted to make sure I give credit to Barry. But Barry Jackson asked, who are your starters? And then with Willie Gay, not being amongst the top two starters, and Joe Barry was very complimentary of the job that and camp that Tyrel Dotson has had, is obviously an incumbent from last year, and then bringing Willie Gay in, and Willie has this really electric start to camp. So I'm talking about what Joe Barry said, and then I want to get into this working theory that I have on what this defense can look like. Joe Barry, when asked about getting Willie Gay on the field, traditionally you're starting two inside linebackers or three inside linebackers. If you're 4-3, don't rotate, but there's no rule against it. We did it last year with David Long and Anthony Walker. We did it in probably 3 to 4 games before Anthony took over, so it's not the norm, but you can absolutely do that. In addition to just finding different packages and different things that you can do to get those guys on the field. It's a champagne problem to have that we have 4 inside linebackers that have all started in this league and played a lot of football. So that's a good problem. Whether it's your rush package stuff where you have outside linebackers who can rush the passer, who can also drop into throwing lanes. That's how we saw Emmanuel Ogbah log an interception last year. Whether you have backers like Jordan Brooks who can mug up in inside gaps or line up on the outside. Whether you play 3 safeties, whether you play 3 linebackers, whether you play 3 linebackers and 3 down, and your 3 down is Zach Sealer and your 2 fresh edge rushers. And then your 3 linebackers you get on the field with Willie Gay and Jordan Brooks and Tyrel Dotson. You got a lot of different ways because of the depth you have at safety, the depth you have at linebacker, and the depth you have right now from a pass rush perspective with the whole group healthy to get probably 8 or 9 guys on the field. So traditionally, teams play more nickel with 5 DBs, and traditionally that 5th DB is a third corner. And as I'm looking at names like Kendall Sheffield, Mike Hilton, and what Cater Co, who's been in the past, and we saw this with Cater last year. There's a proof of concept of he might line up in the nickel, but when they do their pressure looks and their coverage shell rotations, your nickel player might end up playing deep half and invert, and you might bring the safety down to play hook, and you could get to cover 2 or cover 3 or quads or whatever that way. Or you might push out into the flat, and your corners that are pressed up on line of scrimmage might turn and bail out and play cover 3, and then you spin one of the safeties down to play hook to the strong side, or you drop the edge rusher out. If you've got 3 down linemen with 2 rush linebackers, and one of those guys drops out, and you rush 4 that way. Or maybe you drop them both out and you rush a non-traditional player up the middle. I think for me, the perception of, and there's a lot of question about the scheme fit for a lot of these players and the scheme fit for the corners and who's playing inside and who's playing outside. If you're going to be predominantly a disguise zone defense, if your communication is great, the pressure on the corners is less of who can play man-to-man and press and flip and carry Jamar Chase 20 yards downfield, because that list of players in the league is already a very short list. I keep hearing these coaches that talk about storm duck and the aggressiveness and the confidence and the technique and fundamentals and playing in the contact window. And you've heard the cloud technique. Mike McDaniel, I think, referenced that explicitly in a press conference, which is you're going to walk up on line of scrimmage and you're going to play press technique and you're going to disrupt at the line of scrimmage within the 5-yard contact window, but you're playing zone and you're staying underneath. So you might roll a safety over the top and then you're going to jam the you-know-what, it's a family-friendly program, out of that receiver, and then you're going to let him go. And then your eyes are back in the backfield and you're looking to catch anything that comes across the middle shallow, or you're looking for anything out of the backfield. And if you get nothing, then you sink and you can high-low a receiver as he works down the field. That, for me, is kind of like, if that's how they're going to do it, I am not guaranteeing that it's going to work. I'm not guaranteeing that it's a foolproof plan. But as I think about and I'm hearing Anthony Weaver talk about the diversity of the safety room and talking about being strong up the middle and funneling the ball to the outside. And if you're funneling the ball from a run and a pass game perspective to the outside, and you have the ability with how you rotate your coverage shells and the geometry of your coverage relative to eligibles that are releasing out of the routes, you're forcing more low percentage throws. And if you can squeeze and compress them and push them out, and you can fall underneath or force a bunch of bodies to all go into one area, and there's a lot of traffic where mistakes can happen more easily, that kind of feels like the why of how they're going about what they're doing. Like, I'm kind of at the point where I expect Storm Duck to be a starter because he keeps getting gassed up and they keep talking about the physicality and they keep talking about the technique and the toughness and the competitiveness that he plays with. And you saw that last year, which kind of mitigates, hey, I don't think he can play turn and run and play man coverage down the field. I kind of get the sense that you might get a lot of physicality on the outside, but you're not going to get a lot of man coverage on the outside. And then it's, Willie Gay's getting hands-on footballs every single week or every single day at practice. Minkah Fitzpatrick's versatility exists and is well documented. Ify Melifon was a former college corner. You get these linebackers that can drop out. And that goes back to Phillips and the Flores, Josh Boyer scheme where you get the whole birds on a fence and then we're going to drop guys out and take away hot window throws. And it's winning on early downs against the run, forcing obvious passing situations, and everything's exotic. Everything is forcing post-snap processing, but giving you a whole bunch of different information and lying to you before the snap. And if everybody's smart and committed to executing the same coverage picture, in theory, based on where this defense is strong, you can take the pressure off of that spot where your personnel questions exist. And that's how I've been able to reconcile and say, this is, I think, what they're going to try to do this year. But a lot of this, of course, is predicated on getting after the quarterback and winning on early downs, and that happens up front, which is why I was glad we also heard from Austin Clark. But Joe Barry and his champagne problems, I think you could get some really fun stuff going on with Jordan Brooks, Willie Gay. Like, imagine Willie Gay, who is a pass rush threat. And by the way, don't do what the Saints. The Saints put him more at rush outside linebacker than they did put him off the ball last year. When Willie Gay was at his best under Steve Spagnuolo in Kansas City, which was another great, disguise-oriented pressure defense, he was playing 500, 600 snaps off the ball and about 100 snaps on the ball. So whether that's taking Tyrell Dotson off for Willie Gay on 3rd and 9 and mugging him up and then asking him to drop out, or maybe getting all three of those guys on the field if you get some 12 personnel, I don't want to go too crazy and say, hey, imagine if you go Gay, Brooks, Dotson, and then potentially 3 safeties. But man, you could do a lot from a coverage perspective, and then you just have the 2 outside guys who can play physical, and you could zone over the top of it. And you could rush with 3. I mean, you could go 3-3 up the middle with 3 rushers on if it's 3rd and 14 and you're not really worried about a run, the threat of a run. You take your best 3 rushers, whether that's Chop, Jalen, Bradley, or Sealer, or any 3 of those 4. You can go the 3 linebackers, the 3 safeties, and then 2 corners. I'm not a math guy, but 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2 is 11. And you get some really fun stuff cooking. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. But this all ties into winning on early downs. Austin Clark talked about the depth of his unit. That is next here on Locked On Dolphins, so make sure you guys stick with us. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, you can, whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase. Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO that gives you full visibility and control over all of your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you can start building your wealth. Maybe you're like me and it's helpful to see everything laid out. And Monarch can do that for you. So you can see where you can trim some fat, make some smarter decisions, and take control of your finances. You could do so with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. Austin Clark, my favorite position coach on the Dolphins is Austin Clark, because he's a football guy. You could tell. But also the body of work of development of players under Austin Clark. And he has been here effectively as long as Zach Sealer's been here. And that's across how many different defensive coordinators. I think that speaks volumes. I think he does a phenomenal job. I think he's a force multiplier for this Dolphins team from like investing in defensive linemen the way that they have. But he was asked about kind of the depth of his room. And I go back to Anthony Weaver this time last year talking about we want to have the first, second, third wave of the tsunami and then rotate guys. They didn't really do that, right? They didn't have the bodies to do that this past year. It was Zach Sealer, Benito Jones, Deshaun Hand, Calais Campbell. That was really it. I mean, your 5th guy was like the Neil Farrells of the world, the Brandon Peelys of the world, who you just held your breath and said, please don't double team at the point of attack. I don't care how big he is. He's going to go for a ride. And he did. Whoever that 5th guy was when he had to play, that's what it looked like way too often. Austin Clark said this about the depth of his unit. I think this is in my time here. This is the deepest unit where we have 9 guys in the room and all of these guys have an opportunity to make it. When you have the unique mix of rookies that we've invested in, and we've got 4 of them, and then you have veterans who are maybe in that Deshaun Hand as an example type of mold to me, where they didn't get a fair shake somewhere else. Maybe they had a couple different coaches. They fixed in a couple different systems in a few years. You say, here we go. Come show up to OTAs every day. Let's go through training camp and let's battle. And I do agree for all of the discussion. And I've seen some really nasty work about the Dolphins and their depth. And there's some rooms where it's a fair question to make. But Kenneth Grant, Benito Jones, Zach Sealer, Jordan Phillips is a 5th-round draft pick. Pretty good core group right there. And you have Matt Dickerson, who was here last year, got some run, and Austin Clark talked about him being a 4-eye down to a 2-eye. And having an opportunity to compete for an early down role on this team. I think the same goes for Matthew Butler, who I liked in the pre-draft process coming out of Tennessee. And I think he's a great example of a player who got drafted in 2022 in the 5th round by the Raiders, of a player who maybe didn't get a fair shake, was with the Raiders from 22 to 25 and then was waived in May, and the Dolphins claimed him off waiver wires. I could absolutely see him having the same kind of role. So that's 6. Then you got Zeke Biggers, the 7th-round draft pick. Ben Stilley was here for a cup of coffee and then went to waiver, and he flashed in the preseason, remember? And then he ended up in Arizona. Played some, I think it was 300 snaps in 2 years in Arizona after a stop in Cleveland. And now he's back with Miami again. And Alex Huntley, would I pick Alex Huntley as an undrafted free agent to make the roster? No, I wouldn't. Would I pick Ben Stilley to make the roster? No. But you could tell me any of those other 7 names. And Stilley played on Arizona last year. So it's not like it would be unheard of for him to make a 53. I think he's a pretty good bet to make the practice squad. But you've got 7. I don't think you're going to carry 7. But I think you have 7 that could fill a role. And then you look at linebackers, and it's okay, we got 4 plus Channing Tindall, and I don't think they're going to carry 5. So they probably won't carry Channing Tindall. But then safety, I mean, you got the math problem that exists at safety. You go a number of different spots on this roster, and I think you have a math problem where you're going to be bidding farewell to some players that are intriguing, that have a role to play for an NFL franchise. For a team that has woeful and awful and terrible depth, that math doesn't math for me. Now, they're not deep everywhere, and some of the spots where they're not deep might be really hurtful for them, and I'd concede that readily. But as you sit here and you write down the names and you ask, who are we keeping? Who are we not keeping? How many of this position are we keeping? We have to keep this many at this spot. It's going to be tough cuts. Not everywhere. Be some tough cuts. That's going to do it for us here today on the show. I'm going to try to get offensive quotes in as well before we get too far into the week. So I want to give the offensive assistants and some of the things that they had to say their moment in the sun as well. So you have that to look forward to sooner rather than later here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your day. Go Fins. I'm out of here.